Okay, let's do a review on the 1985 World Series champion Kansas City Royals. You may remember this team. They had a incredible run in their World Series championship run as they came back from 3-1 down in both the LCS against the Blue Jays and down 3-1 against the Cardinals in the World Series to bring home the championship to Kansas City. And let's take a look at the 1985 Kansas City Royals Strat-O-Matic team. This team actually had a nice showing in my Strat-O-Matic 1980s tournament. On the American League side, they won in the first round as they swept the 87 Twins 2-0. And then they swept the 1984 Tigers in three straight games. And then finally, in my American League final, they lost to the 1989 Oakland A's. So let's take a deeper look at the 1985 Kansas City Royals. First, I'll take a look at the table setters. The 1-2 guys in the lineup pretty consistently there were Willie Wilson and Lonnie Smith. And let's take a look at their on base numbers. You could see the numbers on Willie Wilson were a little bit low that year. That really wasn't one of Willie Wilson's best years. He only hit, and I say only, because this is a guy who had years where he was consistently either over 300. He had a year where he even hit over 330. He only hit around 285 that year. And Willie Wilson was also never one to really draw a lot of walks. So you can see his on base chances against left handed pitching was a little bit down that year. Lonnie Smith's numbers are okay. Not too crazy about the on base chances here between the 1 and 2 hitters. So we'll take a look at the overall score later. Let's take a deeper look into the Royals' middle of the order. And obviously, set in stone, you had George Brett batting third in that lineup. That was a year where George Brett almost won the MVP. Let's take a look at George Brett's runner advance hits. And you could see pretty consistent there, 7 out of 33 against lefties, 8 out of 33 against righties. Where the middle of the order gets a little alarming to me is, according to the Strat-O-Matic book, you had McRae and Orta platooning at DH, batting cleanup. Now, I could tell you, looking at Hal McRae's card, you could very easily get away with hitting him against lefties and righties and just use Orta off the bench to pinch hit against right-handed pitching. But nonetheless, let's take a look at the cleanup platoon with McRae and Orta. Let's take a look at their runner advance numbers. And you could see the numbers on McRae are okay, 5 out of 33 and 6 out of 33. The numbers on Orta are very low for multiple base advance hits. So not crazy about what we see in the cleanup spot. We go a little deeper into the lineup. We take a look at Frank White. His numbers are okay for a guy who you could hit either like fifth or sixth. That's usually where he would hit in that lineup. Those numbers were okay. Then we take a look at Steve Balboni. His numbers check out just okay. So for the most part, really, other than George Brett, the numbers I would say are at best slightly below average. I wouldn't say that they're bad, but they're certainly not above average or even average. I'd say it's slightly below average. And then let's take a look at the right field platoon where we have Darryl Motley and Pat Sheridan. These are pretty good numbers as far as on base chances here, as you see Motley's numbers against left handed pitching and Pat Sheridan's numbers against right handed pitching. So the way I assess the 1985 Royals offense is obviously at the top of the lineup. You've got two guys with excellent speed, Willie Wilson and Lonnie Smith. Both of them are double A's stealing and 1-17 on the base paths, which you certainly like, and you want to take advantage of that with this team. And obviously, goes without saying, you're more than solid in the third hole with George Brett. What's a little concerning to me is what you have in the cleanup spot. So you may, when you play with this team, you may want to try maybe putting Frank White, maybe hitting cleanup against lefties, or maybe put Steve Balboni in there to maybe get some more potential for some multiple base advancement on your hits, which is what you're looking for out of your 3, 4, 5 guys. But let me break down the numbers that I came up with for the Kansas City Royals offense. First of all, for on base percentage, I had to kind of hit them over the head a little bit here. I only gave them a 2 out of 5. As far as what I see out of the middle of the lineup, the 3, 4, 5 guys, and this is really strictly driven by the fact that they have George Brett hitting third. I gave them a 2.5, 2.5 out of 5. The only reason why it's not lower than that is because you've got obviously George Brett hitting third. However, I did give them a decent score, actually more than decent score when it comes to depth and righty lefty mix and versatility in the lineup. I gave them a 4 out of 5 because I do like the right field platoon that you have with Motley and Sheridan. Both of them are very good at getting on base. Motley would play against lefties, Sheridan would play against righties. And so you're going to be pretty solid in right field with your bat. Steve Balboni is a right-handed hitter who is not affected by facing right-handed pitching, which you like. So, and pretty much the same thing with Frank White. So it's a lineup where even though really other than George Brett, none of the cards really jump out at you and say, wow, this is a really good card. But none of the cards are really going to really kill you and say, okay, well, this guy's an automatic out, or you say, why am I playing this guy? Don't have anyone else to play. I do like the versatility in this lineup. I certainly like the speed. Everybody can run. My overall offensive score for the 1985 Royals came in at a 2.8 out of 5, which basically means that they are slightly above average. Let me take a look at the 1985 Kansas City Royals defensively. Now, at second base, obviously, you were solid with Frank White at second base. Frank White was always one of the best defensive second basemen in baseball, and his Strat-O-Matic cards, his ranks, his E ratings always reflected that. However, you could see you do have a little bit of a hole at shortstop, whether you play Concepcion or Biancalana. You've got an option between either a 2 at short or a 3, and the E ratings are a little bit high. So, because of the fact that if you roll the pitcher's card and you've got a ground ball to shortstop, your chances of turning a double play are really not great when you have E ratings that high if you happen to come up a split. So I'm going to give the Royals middle of the infield defense a 3 out of 5. And the only reason why it is that high is because Frank White was so good. The outfield defense also is just okay. I'm going to give that a 3 out of 5. Obviously, Willie Wilson, you're very solid there. You're a little better off in right field against right-handed pitching when Pat Sheridan is out there, but Darren Motley is not going to kill you, but at the same time, he's not great in right field. But obviously, you do have a big hole in left field with Lonnie Smith with his 4 and his high E rating. So I kind of went back and forth a little bit on the Royals outfield defensive score. And the reason why I did score them above average is because I do take center field defense highly into account when I'm grading the overall outfield defense. So I feel comfortable with my 3 out of 5 score for the Kansas City Royals outfield defense. Overall, I think the E ratings on this team are above average. You had George Brett at third base, who had one of his better E ratings that year. And I spoke about what you have at second base and shortstop, Pat Sheridan in right field against right-handed pitching. So overall, I give them an E rating of a 3.5 out of 5. So my final defensive score for the 1985 Royals comes out to a 3.2 out of 5. Now let's take a look at the Kansas City Royals starting rotation. And you're going to see right off the bat that Brett Saberhagen is a very easy 5 out of 5, perfect score for an ace. For me, this was a very easy call. You see his on base chances when you roll his card, very consistent, 7 inning point of weakness. And it's a guy where when you're playing with them and you put Brett Saberhagen down, you kind of say, okay, I got a good chance of winning this game. So Brett Saberhagen, very solid ace for the 1985 Royals. That's an easy call. He gets a 5 out of 5. And then let me take a look at the next three starters, your 2, 3, 4 starters, Bud Black, Charlie Lee Brandt, and Danny Jackson. And you're going to see their numbers are very consistent, very solid between the three of them versus left-handers and right-handers. Now, this is where I was giving them a grade. I originally put them down as a 5 out of 5, and then I kind of thought about it and I changed my score to a 4 out of 5. And the reason why I did that was because I kind of look at these ratings as like Hall of Fame voting. If you have to think about whether or not someone was a Hall of Famer or not, then he's not a Hall of Famer. It's the same thing with my ratings here. If you have to think about someone or some area of a team being a 5 out of 5, then it's not a 5 out of 5. Again, the numbers on Black, Liebrand, and Jackson are very solid. I had to cut them back to a 4 out of 5 when it comes to starting rotation depth. So their final rating on their starting pitchers came out to a 4.5 out of 5. Now, real quick, let's take a look at the bullpen here. The closer was obviously Dan Quisenberry. Dan Quisenberry was always a guy who, on his Strat-O-Matic card, would have some hits on it, mostly singles. He was never really a guy who really gave up a lot of home runs. You could see he's a little vulnerable against left-handed batting, where you have 10 chances out of 33 when you roll his card of reaching base, and his numbers are a little better against right-handers. So I'm going to give Dan Quisenberry a 4 out of 5 when it comes to his closer card. And then when I look at the bullpen depth is also going to get a 4 out of 5. The overall bullpen depth rating was driven down by Beckwith and Mike Jones's cards. I could tell you're really solid at the setup position with Steve Farr. Very consistent numbers. He's a 3-inning reliever. You see his numbers right there. But then also let's take a look at the numbers for Beckwith and Jones. You can see neither one of their numbers really check out that great. I mean, Mike Jones is a lefty who really doesn't get lefties out. You can see 13 out of 33. Beckwith is a nice option out of the pen if you need to get a right-handed batter out. The reason why I came up with a 4 out of 5 score for the Kansas City Royals bullpen depth score is because I do really like Steve Farr's card, and I like the fact that he's a 3-inning reliever, and you could really eat up a lot of innings with him out of the pen if need be to hand the game off to Dan Quisenberry. So as we look at the Kansas City Royals overall scores, once again, offensively, they graded out as a 2.8 out of 5. Defense, I gave them a 3.2 out of 5. Starting pitching was a 4.5 out of 5. And the bullpen rated a 4 out of 5. So overall, their average rating came out to a 3.6 out of 5, which still puts the Kansas City Royals as a good team. I would not call this Strat-O-Matic team a very good team because there are some spots in the lineup. The chances of getting on base or getting a hit are really not that great. You could definitely see a scenario where you're playing a game with them, and if you don't get lucky and get Willie Wilson or Lonnie Smith on the base paths and George Brett does something to drive somebody in, you could have a hard time generating some runs with this team. Also brought down their overall score was, you would have thought at first look their middle infield defensive score would at least be a 4 with someone like Frank White at second base. But what brought that score down to a 3 out of 5 was not particularly crazy about these numbers out of your shortstop when it comes to defense. So the Kansas City Royals defense did kind of overall hurt their final score. Again, very solid in the starting rotation. I think the bullpen is good enough. But once again, I come out to a final score, a final rating for the 1985 Royals of a 3.6 out of 5. So that's my review on the 1985 World Series champion Kansas City Royals. I appreciate you watching. And my next video will be on the 1981 World Series champion Los Angeles Dodgers.